All right, good afternoon everybody, you can hear me? Yes, good, thanks for sticking around. I'm sure some of you will come in from afternoon tea. The main person's here, I noticed, so that's great. There was a second person I was hoping was coming, but they might come soon. Before we begin, let me acknowledge the Ngambri and Ngunnawal peoples, their elders past, present and emerging. My name is Nicholas Hoare, for those of you who don't know me. I'm a historian here at the Department of Pacific Affairs. I do have a research interest in mainly French colonial rule and its legacies in Mā'ohi Nui French Polynesia and Kanaky-New Caledonia. That's why I'm here today. I'm not going to talk for long. It's really my, it's a privilege for me to be introducing this panel and the panelists to you this afternoon. We're not really an organised research team like the previous session, but it'd be great if we could become one. Who knows what will come out of this? Of course, the theme of this conference is weaving research partnerships. So the original rationale, though, was this book here, titled France in the South Pacific, Power and Politics. And the idea was to have a kind of retrospective look on this. This book, of course, published by one of our panelists, Denise Fisher. This was published in 2013. So the idea was to go through what has sort of changed and what has maybe stayed the same since. But then I thought, more recently, given just how much political change and power shifts we have witnessed only in the last few weeks, let alone the last decade, I do not think we're going to have much time to return to the Sarkozy era of the book. Indeed, the abstract for this panel in the conference program, some of you would have seen, it's already out of date, right? Concerning New Caledonia, the Bougival Compromise Agreement that some had hopes could be the solution to the current constitutional stalemate in New Caledonia, that's been voted down by parliamentarians in Paris. And in French Polynesia, Moatai Brotherson gave a very optimistic keynote 2 years ago at this very conference, while his ruling Tavini Independence Party is in the process of disintegrating after a disappointing municipal election outcome. So, while we don't have a time in this session to go, through a thorough historical perspective, the sort of perspective that I favour, I still want us to think about continuity and change, right? Because I think these two sub-themes of Denise's book, Power and Politics, they're still as relevant as ever, and I want us to think about change and continuity. Because although, so much is changing in recent times, I think some of those key themes are remaining. So we're going to tackle this question from multiple perspectives, starting off, I think, as you can see up here, with Denise Fisher. Denise Fisher is a former Australian diplomat, and she's a visiting fellow at the Department of Pacific Affairs. She's a regular contributor on French politics, especially to Lowy publications. She just told me now that she has actually 2 more books in the pipeline after this one. I think she's one of Australia's most incisive commentators on this subject. Let me just quickly go through the other speakers, and then I'll hand over to Denise for the first intervention. Our second speaker today is Jimmy Naona. He's no stranger at all to the ANU or Australia. He's a politician in New Caledonia. He's of Kanak origin, and he's a former spokesperson for the pro-independence party, the FLNKS. He tells me he's be speaking here today in a personal capacity. After Jimmy, we have Dr. Anthony Tutugoro. He's also no stranger to the ANU or Australia. He's a political scientist. He's from the University of New Caledonia, and he'll be speaking about the possibility of power sharing in New Caledonia. And finally, we have Rahimana Tevahitua, a PhD student here at DPA. He will be giving us a glimpse of the key forces at play in his native French Polynesia. He's also been doing a lot of field work, both there and in New Caledonia, and he's focusing on this question of power diplomacy. So that's just the 4 of us, but I know there's a lot of experts in the room as well. I'm delighted we have experts such as the well-known journalist and historian Nick McLennan, and we also have the leader of the April 2025 Pacific People's Mission to Kanaky-New Caledonia, it's Anna Naupa. So hopefully we can stick to 15 minutes each with our speakers, and then we'll have a good 30 minutes for Q&A at the end, and we're keen to hear from all of you. Without any further ado, thank you very much. Denise, please take the floor.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for being here, and thank you to the organisers for having me to speak. New Caledonia, France, and the Indo-Pacific. The 2 most significant changes in France and its exercise of power in the Pacific since my book have been its declaration of its status as an Indo-Pacific power based on its sovereignty in the two oceans, and the inconclusive, controversial, and violent end of 30 years of agreements ending civil disturbances over independence in New Caledonia. I'll briefly look at both of these developments and then argue that by its own definition, success for France in its Indo-Pacific policies depends on its successful management of New Caledonia. And I'll note some consequences for the Pacific, notably for Australia and for the Pacific Island countries. Since 2013, much of my work has traced the shifts in France's self-perceived role. From France in the South Pacific, the title of my book at the time, to France of the South Pacific as a resident sovereign power, and to France as an Indo-Pacific power, as being of the Pacific and Indian Oceans. At the broader geostrategic level, the background to this policy shift included the rise in presence and influence of China, the reactions to that, the greater but still limited increased interest by the United States, the defensive increased ratcheting upwards by Australia, adjustments by Japan, Taiwan, and much greater exogenous interest from other countries wanting to become involved. At the same time as the Pacific Island Forum countries were adjusting their own foreign policy connections and dealing with this surge of interest. This meant that France shifted from, when I was writing that book, being one of the major players in a field of the Pacific that was relatively static. It was seeking to shore up its image after the disastrous nuclear testing policies and decolonisation policies of the 70s to the 1990s, and it was doing a pretty good job of it. But it had to adjust to being one of many players in the Pacific. At the same time, throughout the 2010s, France developed a heightened awareness of the strategic significance of its 13 overseas territories around the globe, especially its Pacific territories. By 2010, the United States and Japan were starting to talk about an Indo-Pacific vision. But back in France, Sarkozy was talking about France of the three oceans. He was starting to get an understanding of the strategic importance of the presence of the 13 territories in the three oceans. The global presence that they represent was reviewed in a number of strategic papers by Defence, their Senate and so on throughout the 2010s. And they consolidated this idea of the strategic value of its overseas territories, underpinning France's status as a leading Western ally with nuclear capability built on the testing in the Pacific, and one of only 5 permanent members of the Security Council, a leader in the EU and in NATO. Its Pacific presence alone gives to France the status of the world number 2 maritime power by virtue of the economic exclusive zone, of which France's 11 square million kilometres, coming but primarily from its overseas territories, 7 million come from its Pacific territories alone. They support its military presence and its listening post capability, headquartered in New Caledonia, as well as the European Space Programme. It gives France a place in Pacific tables and multilateral organisations that it would not have otherwise. It provides a base for its scientific and technological research expertise, including on the environment and climate change, and its sovereignty in New Caledonia alone gives it access to sought-after strategic minerals, most notably nickel, cobalt, antimony, and hydrocarbons. In 2018, President Macron decided to announce this Indo-Pacific policy. It's one that has various features. Mainly, it is based squarely on sovereign presence in the oceans. And he chose Sydney and New Caledonia as the places where he was announcing this policy for the first time, as he opened the first final, long-awaited independence referendum in New Caledonia. I think at the time he had confidence that New Caledonia was going to vote to remain French. Sarkozy, years before, had said, look, we want to vote, we want to have a final vote where 70% of French people, of New Caledonians at least, will vote to stay with France. And the French were seriously trying to work to attain that by giving lots of concessions and compromises. He said at the time, without New Caledonia, France would be less beautiful because it was part of global France. This France that exists in this region of the world, thousands of kilometres from Paris, but at the heart of where it is France's own vocation to project itself across all continents and over all seas. Second, he projected France's role as one as a protector against the hegemonic rise of China, which he said was a threat to the reason. This was at a time when people did not actually directly refer to China as a threat. By 2021, after 2 independence referendums had been held in New Caledonia, both of them shocking France by the size and base of support, the minority support for independence. They both voted to stay with France, but there was a large Kanak-based minority, 43% in the first one, 47% in the second one, 2020. I think his confidence was a little bit shaken. But what he decided to do was amp up his argument for France as a regional protector, speaking this time from Papeete, where he said that he was projecting the offer to other small island states of France and the EU as an alternative partner and protector, an alternative to China and the United States. Woe betide the small, he said. Woe betide the isolated. Woe betide those who subject to influences, incursions by hegemonic powers, plural, who will come for their fish, their technologies, their economic resources. I say clearly to you, here it is France, and you will be protected. In every statement of France's Indo-Pacific strategy since, and there have been quite a few, the policy is explicitly based on France's resident sovereignty by virtue of its possessions in the 2 oceans and evolving into France as a counter to China and the US, and more recently invoking the European Union, which now has, led by France, its own Pacific and Indo-Pacific strategies in which these overseas territories are considered, quote, vital strategic outposts of the European Union. By identifying this role for itself and for Europe in this way, France has itself dramatically heightened the stakes for its own successful management and continued possession of its overseas territories, and specifically its Pacific territories, where it is being challenged. In 2023, as we just heard from Nick, Matthias Brotherson, the Independence Party, won government for the first time in French Polynesia, and Mana is going to speak about that later. And in New Caledonia, the decolonisation process is not yet finished. And I would argue that the stakes are even higher for France in New Caledonia than in any of the other possessions, because it is preeminent overseas possession by virtue of its EEZ boundaries, its nickel resources, its minerals, and the fact that it alone of all France's overseas territories has a large settler population. And it is where its sovereignty is directly being challenged at this end of this 30 years of process of transition agreements. It follows that how France manages New Caledonia will have implications for its resident sovereignty, not only in the Pacific, but in its other overseas possessions. French Polynesia, others around the globe are looking what is France doing in New Caledonia to see whether they can have the same privileges. So how is France doing in New Caledonia? I would argue that under Macron, France has made some major strategic errors, which have undermined local and regional confidence in its intentions, particularly in its commitment to a democratic outcome, its respect for its island Indigenous citizens. First, the botched third referendum. After decades of collaboration, compromise, innovation, admirable efforts to be impartial, France kind of dropped the ball by the third referendum. It seems to have lost confidence, perhaps having seen the large and growing size of support for independence. And when the third referendum came about, it scheduled it at a date which was in the middle of the COVID pandemic. Independence leaders themselves, clan leaders, urged the government to postpone this, and it was legally possible to postpone it for a year. But Le Cornu, who was the overseas minister at the time, currently Prime Minister in France, decided to stick with that date. The Indigenous leaders called for a boycott, and this is what the result was. We had just over 43% growing to 47%, just under 47% independence, down to 3.5% as The Kanaks boycotted the referendum en masse. This led to a complete political impasse, which has lasted right up till now. The second strategic error is that after 3 years, where admirably France did try to bring everybody around the table, but failed, Macron decided to push ahead and to impose, through legislation from Paris, constitutional change to the sensitive eligibility to vote clause on which independence leaders had based all of their compromises over the last 30 years. This meant that what began as peaceful demonstrations degenerated into violence and destruction over a period of a year in 2024. Devastating violence, destroying lives, and certainly the economy. It was only brought under control by France sending at least 3,600 police personnel, security personnel to New Caledonia. Some say up to 6,000 were sent there. The region watched in awe as France sent all these military personnel, quasi-military personnel to New Caledonia. And even today, there are 2,600 people there, personnel from France trying to keep control. Third, France has repeatedly postponed local elections, as it has imposed a counterproductive policy of carrot and stick. We're now looking to, hopefully, an election in June this year. Finally, again forgetting the lessons of history, France persisted single-mindedly to legislate from Paris, again, its plans for a further agreement, the Bougival Accord that Nick told us about. Despite the loss of essential party support, within a month the core independence coalition pulled out of this agreement, and despite, somewhat incredibly, lack of a capacity in Paris even to pass legislation to impose it. We had the Socialist Party, National French Socialist Party, critically pointing out it could not support it because it was not respecting the people of New Caledonia, and there was no consensus back home. So the next step, I'm sure our friends would talk about this, provincial elections in the next couple of months, but under what conditions we don't know. All we know is that the tensions, the fear on the part of the loyalists, the hypersensitivity on the part of Indigenous people who feel that they have not been respected, makes for a very tense environment, and in my view, the likelihood of a risk of a return to violence. In its conduct, therefore, France has raised questions in the neighbourhood about its intentions and its respect for its own large and growing Indigenous minority, and crucially about the democratic process that it is implementing. And the neighbourhood is watching. Let's look at Australia. There's a great close relationship with France and Australia. There are a couple of strategic agreements that Australia has signed and strengthened in the last 10 years or so. No doubt, Australia sees great benefit in the constructive efforts of a major Western ally in the Pacific, and France has spent a lot of investment in diplomacy and political power to improve its image since the bad old days of the nuclear tests. So we share perspectives, but only up to a point, and that point is, as Senator Wong pointed out when she went to New Caledonia in 2023, it is for the Australia won't take a position, but it is for the New Caledonian people to decide. Democratic principles. And as we heard from Mr. Conroy this morning, the major overriding objective for Australia is the peace, harmony, prosperity and stability in the region. If there's a threat to that, that's a problem for Australia. New Caledonia has long been of key strategic importance to Australia. It straddles sea lanes, bringing things in from the north. It is in the heart of the Melanesian strategic buffer to our northeast, and it has proven strategic significance in the past. In the early days of World War II, it was Australia that set up the de Gaulle government in New Caledonia, shoring up that, what they called the aircraft carrier off its shores, so that enabled the Americans to come in and establish Noumea as its base for the Pacific Wars which defended and protected Australia from Japanese invasion and which are at the base of the alliance with the United States, which persists up until this day. So what happens in New Caledonia is important for Australia. And what we've seen is that the nuclear testing issue in the 1990s was one that was viscerally opposed in Australia and New Zealand. We had the nuclear bomb going off, being tested regularly in French Polynesia, and we had Australian citizens very concerned. Australian citizens, the people, rising up, boycotting French goods, throwing a bomb at the consulate of the French in Perth in 1995, and ultimately leading to the cessation of French nuclear testing in 1996, and the negotiation by France of new autonomies for its territories, including New Caledonia. But in New Caledonia, the decolonisation and self-determination process is not yet complete, and violence and instability have returned. This is a concern for Australia. There are also implications for the Pacific Island countries. France cannot succeed in its pretension to be an Indo-Pacific partner without the support and acceptance of island countries. Island governments pay attention to what happens in France's Pacific territories and have a history of successfully pressuring France to change its policies. Indeed, the Pacific Island Forum itself was formed because France absolutely banned discussion of its policies in the then South Pacific Commission. So the island countries simply got up and organised the South Pacific Forum, now the Pacific Islands Forum. The Melanesian Spearhead Group was formed in the mid-80s, specifically to support independence in New Caledonia. And island members orchestrated a very successful international campaign over decades to focus attention on France's nuclear and decolonisation policies, ultimately leading the French to change these policies by 1996. The island governments take a particularly close interest in New Caledonia. Over virulent French government opposition, island governments took New Caledonia to the United Nations in 1986, and a resolution has been passed on New Caledonia every year since then in the UN. They did the same for French Polynesia in 2013. Both the MSG and the Pacific Island Forum closely monitor self-determination in New Caledonia. They observed over many years the implementation of the Noumea Accord, sending teams to observe and report. They sent observer missions to all 3 independence referendums and issued a slamming critique of the 3rd controversial referendum. In October 2024, the Pacific Island Forum sent a ministerial mission to New Caledonia at the height of the violence to see if they could play a role, a constructive role to help things, to help everybody through this crisis. Their report has yet to be made public. To conclude, France has attributed to itself a role as a resident sovereign Indo-Pacific power. Its success in this depends largely on its retaining sovereignty and ongoing goodwill in the Pacific region. The litmus test for France's goodwill in conducting itself as an Indo-Pacific power is its handling of the New Caledonian independence issue, the respect it shows its own Indigenous people and the people of the region, and the democratic way in which that is worked out. So I think there's a lot to think about there. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Yes, thank you very much, Denise. We're going to be pushing up against time in the session, I think. So yeah, I'll just quickly invite Jimmy up to the podium to give his perspective from Kanaky. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas, and thank you, Denise, for setting the context of our presentation today. I had prepared also a PowerPoint presentation, but things have moved so fast in New Caledonia that it is still relevant, but I thought I would just provide some background to the decolonization process in New Caledonia so that the audience is more aware of where we are getting at now in terms of the different agreements that are being negotiated with France. But before I do that, let me pay respect to the traditional owners of this land where we gather today. And by the same token, thank the Department of Pacific Affairs and ANU for bringing me over to attend this very important regional conference. I'd like to also say on the outset that for New Caledonia, France remains the last colonial power in the Pacific, and that this is a truth that no one can deny. Unless France revisits its relations with our region, especially through its remaining non-self-governing territories of New Caledonia, French Polynesia, and Wallis and Futuna, despite its checkbook diplomacy and through its aid agencies and regional organizations, its diplomatic ties will never be solid and sincere, and its presence in the region will continue to threaten political stability and regional security in our Blue Pacific continent. I speak here in my own capacity as an indigenous Kanak advocate for the right to self-determination of my people and the remaining colonized people in the Pacific. So please bear with me. I'm neither an academic nor a researcher. I speak from experience and from what my people has lived through over the past. I concur that this August regional academic forum is not a tribune for political speech, and I apologize and respect that. However, please understand that the situation in New Caledonia is evolving so fast that what I had prepared for today's presentation is no longer, is moving fast and no longer relevant. So I will speak from bare notes on the situation in New Caledonia. So our topic today stems from the standpoint of Denise Fisher's writings in 2013, where she concluded and put this thought forward: France's future in the Pacific has yet to be secured. Let me ask this question: has yet to be secured by who? For what interest? In whose interest it is to secure France's presence or future in the Pacific? But before we speak about France's future in the Pacific, let me remind us of France's past in the Pacific, since colonization and through the short history of France's presence in the Pacific. France's relations in the Pacific has been at times friendly, chaotic, condescending, and paternalistic, and definitely colonial for us, the remaining territories of the Pacific. Its continued presence in the Pacific will, to some extent, continue to threaten political stability and regional security in our Blue Pacific continent, unless there is a genuine change in the way that it conducts its relations with its remaining colonies in the region. The deadly riots in Nouméa last year and events throughout the short history of France settling into the Pacific has shown that history can repeat itself where there is no commitment and the political will to do things differently. You've seen in the slides from Denise's presentation what happened last year, the crisis that New Caledonia went through. It is definitely how we don't want and what we don't want to see reproduced in the future unless we as a region collectively contribute to the process of decolonisation in New Caledonia. It is not an eternal matter of France and New Caledonia. It is a regional issue that the region has to address as an issue of political stability and regional security for our Blue Pacific Ocean. Beyond its claimed French territories, France's enterprise and legacy, colonial legacy, was also at work in other parts of the region, not to mention Aotearoa, New Zealand in 1987. Some of you may remember the Rainbow Warrior. The French testing in Mororua and Whangataufa in French Polynesia, or the massacre in Hoare in New Caledonia in 1988. France annexed New Caledonia in 1853 and then imposed many statutes from 1853 up to 1956. In 1946, Kanaks were granted French citizenship, and it was not until 1956 that some of us could vote in local elections. Fast forward in 1983 at Naville-les-Roches near Paris in France, during early negotiations with France towards independence, the Kanak people decided to share their right to self-determination as a colonized people with non-Kanaks, those we now call victims of history or victimes de l'histoire, who had been brought to the country by force or coercion, and those who today have decided to make New Caledonia their homeland and for generations to come. In 1988, following months of negotiations, the Mā'ohi agreements were signed to give way to economic rebalancing between Nouméa and other parts of the country. Prior to that, it is also important, and Denise did mention also, that New Caledonia, thanks to the support of Pacific Island Forum countries and Melanges Good Spearhead Group member countries, supported the relisting of New Caledonia at the United Nations Decolonisation Committee. And in 1998, the Nouméa Accord was negotiated and signed again in Paris, unfolding a new and innovative process of decolonisation that led to 3 referendums on self-determination, of which result you also saw on the slides in 2018 and 2020, where the results were very close. And in 2021, the 3rd referendum that was also boycotted by pro-independence groups. So following from that, the government in Paris still decided to go ahead with a constitutional reform to change the electoral roll and put through a constitutional reform bill to open up the electoral roll for non-residents and non-citizens of New Caledonia to vote in local elections. The restricted electoral roll was applicable under the Nouméa Accord as part of the decolonisation process. This proposed reform bill ignited the already tense situation on the ground following months of protest and resulted in violent clash with French police, especially around Nouméa and its suburbs, in May 2024. In 2025, after months of violent riots, talks resumed again in Paris to end the crisis, to rebuild the economy, and to set New Caledonia back on the path of decolonisation. The first attempt at an agreement fell through when non-independence groups rejected the outcomes of the DEVA talks in New Caledonia, aiming at an associated state with France. Many rounds of talks later followed until an agreement was finally reached in Bougival near Paris and signed in July last year. But the pro-independence coalition, the Africans, withdrew its signature, citing abuse of trust by the French government. Earlier this year, the Bougival Accord was signed in Paris as well, followed by a protocol called the Élysée-Oudinot Agreement to complement the Bougival Agreement. So, is the Bougival Accord another statute, or is it the final leg to independence in New Caledonia? But the Bougival Accord, when it was signed, was widely discussed, commented, and drew criticism from all parts of the political spectrum in New Caledonia. It prompted critics also from academia, of which some academics from prestigious universities in Australia and elsewhere, whether they support the right to self-determination of our people, or whether they advocate for New Caledonia to remain within the French Republic. Proponents of the Bougival Accord argue that this new agreement sets the pace for a final path to achieve independence for New Caledonia within the next 10 years, if all parties work together to implement the commitments made under this agreement. That is, the recognition of Kanak identity, which is to reinforce provisions of the Nouméa Accord, the recognition of a New Caledonian nationality, which also stems from the citizenship recognized under the Nouméa Accord, the recognition of a state of New Caledonia via a constitutional amendment for a specific title in the French Constitution, That's also another follow-up from the Nouméa Accord. The immediate and majority transfer of external relations to New Caledonia, the progressive transfer of sovereign powers, law and order, justice, defense, and immigration to New Caledonia through a mechanism that is to be agreed upon by our local parliament, and the recognition of the right to self-determination to remain enshrined in the French Constitution. Opponents to the Bougival Accord argue that it is another form of recolonization by France to keep New Caledonia under control, while some non-independence groups consider that it will definitely lead to full sovereignty and independence through the progressive transfer of powers to the new state of New Caledonia. Reality is that whichever side you're on, the decolonization process must be pursued and a genuine compromise found to satisfy all parties, including France as the administering power. But for this to happen, again, France's relations to the region, especially through its remaining territories, need to shift from a mere geostrategic calculations to genuine and trusted partnerships. And it must pursue a viable political solution in New Caledonia and French Polynesia to guarantee stability and security in our Blue Pacific region. The Bougival Accord is considered a good political compromise between all parties, and it provides avenues for New Caledonia and France with the support of regional partners and members of the Pacific Island Forum, as well as the Melanesian Spearhead Group, in particular Australia and New Zealand, to find a lasting solution for the stability of the region. After nearly 60 years of imposed statutes by France, the Bougival Accord, like the Matignon and Nouméa Accords, are negotiated agreements between France and local parties in New Caledonia that set the pace of decolonization process that commit all parties, especially France, to achieve the first successful decolonization process in its own history. So where to now? The Bougival agreement signed in July last year was hailed as historical by the French president himself and considered by all parties as the greatest step in the decolonization process initiated under the Nouméa Accord. Many in New Caledonia found hope in the new agreement that will set the country back on track and help rebuild the economy after the crisis. That hope was short-lived, as the draft reform bill that was meant to provide a constitutional basis for the agreement was rejected by the French National Assembly a week ago. Talks have now resumed this week between the French government and New Caledonia parties to reach a decision on the way forward. The provincial elections to renew members of our local parliament is due next June. But the contentious and highly explosive issue that needs to be cleared and agreed upon by all parties is who will vote at these provincial elections. The future of France again will be put to a test on how it will deal with this, and this will depend on how it will handle this new episode of the political history of New Caledonia. So again, the contentious issue at the heart of these upcoming provincial elections in June is the electoral roll that is currently being restricted to New Caledonian citizenship. It is a measure that has been taken by under the Nouméa Accord to ensure that only New Caledonian citizens can vote in these local elections. But what prompted the crisis in 2024 is when France decided to open up or put a constitutional reform bill through to open up the electoral roll to non-New Caledonian citizens, what prompted the crisis in 2024. So we hope that in the upcoming June elections, this won't happen again. And this calls on regional partners and members of regional organizations to help New Caledonia go through this process for the stability and security of our region. So I will stop there, and if there's any question later, we can answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Jimmy. What a brilliant reminder that decolonisation is a process and needs dialogue on all sides, not just of politics, but with academics as well. And it sort of reminded me the interesting decision at a conference a few weeks ago in Papeete in French Polynesia. The conference title was Sovereignty in Question, right? And because of the power and politics at play, the decision was made to make that conference à huis clos, behind closed doors, right? And so Mana might be able to talk about that a little bit later because he was at that conference. For now, though, when we're talking about dialogue, I'm really delighted to bring Dr. Anthony up to the stage to talk about the grey zones, areas of compromise in Kanaky and/or New Caledonia. Thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. Before I talk, I'd like to pay my respect to the visible and invisible in the room, which allows us to present our work today. So my colleagues talk about regional perspectives and dynamics between New Caledonia and France. So everything comes perfectly. Like I will talk a bit more about the dynamics, internal dynamics at the moment, based on the survey we did, we ran last year, end of last year. So I present my presentation will be like a policy paper. So we go straight to the results. This communications on a policy paper format looks at key issues in Kanaky and/or New Caledonia, a divided society shaped by colonial history and the numeric code. The main question is belonging. Who can vote in provincial elections and who is seen as a full member of the political community? Here, citizenship is central to power sharing between Kanak people and other communities. The Inclusive Peace Project takes place in the context of tension linked to a planned change in the electoral role, as Jimmy mentioned. Because these elections shape the political balance, any change could weaken the fragile agreement of 1998. The research asks what acceptable citizenship could be, based on French nationality, residence, or place of birth, and studies public views to find possible compromises. It also explores alternatives to the simple choice between independence and remaining part of France, and looks at how Kanak identity is represented through institutions like the Customary Senate. Overall, the challenge is to define belonging and political balance in a way that protects peace and supports long-term stability. So the main results I will be presenting today is the first one is that maintaining the status quo concerning the provincial electorate is the solution most likely to have the favor of respondents we had on the survey from all communities of belonging. Regarding the political future of Kanaky and New Caledonia, intermediate solutions obtain a broader consensus across all communities, unlike binary solutions which are always supported mainly by a single community of belonging. And the third result will be that opinions differ between keeping the Kanak only customary Senate as it is, or opening it to others with elections, and adding Wallis and Futuna representative is not widely supported. A few words about the methods and our approach. So this research aims to better understand opinion dynamics in New Caledonia. It is based on a survey of 206 people. This sufficiently large sample reliably reflects the country's diversity. And to ensure this representativeness, the survey company used the stratified quota sampling method. In practical terms, this allows for balancing the sample by taking into account the different geographical and demographic realities. The field survey was conducted by the Quidnovi Institute between early August and mid-October 2025, so last year. We offer here an initial interpretation of the results based on descriptive statistics relating to issues directly linked to the New Caledonia's context. This choice aims to an initial step. It is first about identifying the major trends emerging among the communities of belonging to the archipelago in order to identify areas of potential convergence. So let's discuss this first result I just mentioned before. we therefore created 4 models that address current political debates to test respondents' opinions. So model 1 is citizenship open to all French people. Model 2 is citizenship open to anyone who can prove 10 years of residence in New Caledonia. Model 3 is a citizenship open to anyone who arrived in New Caledonia before 1998. And model 4 is a citizenship open only to natives of New Caledonia. So sorry, I made the graph yesterday evening. I tried to translate everything, but some things are still in French, so it's okay. It allows you to work a bit your French this afternoon, so, so sorry about that. Although we were aware of the rejection of opening up the electoral body, we needed to test this assumption on the ground. So the overall results reveal several key findings. The first is that the model most favored by respondents is model 3, the one provided for in the Nouméa Accord, which grants citizenships to anyone who arrived before 1998, as Jimmy was talking just before. It is also the model with which respondents disagree the least, 14%, as you see on the screen. So conversely, model 1, which simulates opening the electoral body to all French nationals living in New Caledonia, is the one that receives the lowest approval rate from respondents and the highest rejection rate. Finally, it should be noted that model 4, which proposes extending citizenships to all native-born citizens, is the least consensual model. While it has 47% support, it receives 37% opposition, making it the most divisive model. Let's have a look on the second results. So here is the hypothesis we initially had. While the local population has been systematically asked binary choices, do you want New Caledonia to achieve full sovereignty and become independent? They have never been asked about intermediate solutions. Our initial hypothesis is that while there are indeed 2 distinct poles, 2 major opposing views, there may also be gray areas, namely intermediate zones, which could provide a more solid basis for negotiation in order to take the heat out of the debate. So we asked the respondents specific questions that will help identify these gray areas, namely the questions of the political future of New Caledonia and the question of nationality. So let's have a look at the first one. So there might be, so if you look on the left, the model is, it's a simple way of asking the respondents on the field. We just ask on a scale from 1 to 10, would you want New Caledonia to remain part of France or to become fully sovereign? So when you look at the results, you find these 2 poles, like we discovered the same results as the referendum, to be honest. You find the poll like 16% who wants to be completely part of France and 22% to be independent. But the major things to watch in this scale is the people who locate themselves in the middle. So I'm sorry for the format, so from a computer to another, it changes it. So you can see that there is 33% that located themselves in between, okay? And when you look at it from a community of belongings side, it is even more interesting to watch. On the left, there is the Kanak people way of answering. After you have the European category, Polynesian is Tahitian, Walisian, and Futunian. Métis is not really a community of belongings. It's all the people who would tick several communities, okay, while answering the survey. And the other and non-declared are mostly Asian people. So when you look at the blue side, okay, the blue side is people who want to be fully independent, okay? The orange side is people who want to remain part of France. And when you look at the intermediate zones, the green ones, you can see that there is a third in each of community of belongings that declare themselves to be ready for an intermediate solution. Okay? So I let you name it, okay? Associated States, or it's just like we can go further, okay, in the interpretation of the result. When you look at the nationality, we find quite the same result, okay? So 23% for the French nationality, 19% for the nationality of the new state, and 33% for a double nationality, okay? So when I followed the people on the field, they were asked, like, will you be in favor of a double passport, French nationality and nationality of the new state? And you find these 33%. And when you look at the results based on the community of belongings, you find exactly the same results, okay? So in the green zone, people who are in favor of this double nationality. And when we created these models, like it was before the previous discussions that Jimmy just mentioned before the Bougival agreement, before the DEVA. So that's something that is interesting to see, even now for the next steps of the negotiations for the country. So to finish with the last result I will present today, a word about the customary Senate and the composition of the customary Senate. If we were to imagine an integration of other communities of belonging organized on a customary, cultural, or social level, and of course, outside the political field, inclined to integrate the customary Senate, our hypothesis is that the Kanak respondents will be the least favorable to this type of opening, unlike the respondents from other communities who will be more in favor of this option. The first key finding is that the majority of respondents seems to favor the third option, namely the greatest possible openness, as you can see on the screen. So it's on the right for you. A total of 43% of respondents indicated they wanted to maintain the current composition of the customary Senate. And the second key finding is the very low percentage of respondents who favored the second option, also the one in the middle, namely opening the customary Senate to Wallisian and Futunian customary representatives. Thus, the composition is viewed in a rather binary fashion, either a composition limited to Kanak customary representatives or one including all organized communities without intermediaries. When examining responses by community, the initial hypothesis is not strongly supported. A majority of Kanak respondents favor maintaining the status quo through a significant 39% support opening the Senate to other communities. European respondents show the clearest divide, with nearly 2/3 supporting openness, while 1/3 prefer the current system. Polynesian, mixed race, Asian, and other respondents generally display the opposite pattern to Kanak respondents, with majorities favoring openness. Overall, support for the opening the Senate is strongest among European, Asian, and other communities, while Kanak respondents remain more inclined toward preserving the existing structure. Finally, the last hypothesis we wanted to test concerned the method of investiture of the customary Senate. Debates, sometimes public, sometimes private, took place on the hypothesis of introducing elections into the process of selecting senators who are currently designated by their customary areas, so by the 8 Kanak countries. Our initial premise is that the election process for appointing senators to such an institution is not favored by Kanak and Polynesian or Oceanian respondents. Our hypothesis, therefore, is that Kanak and Oceanian respondents would be more inclined to preserve a method of appointment that adheres to specific customs and traditions. On the contrary, we hypothesize that European respondents are more inclined towards the election process. Overall, the responses do not reveal any trend regarding this question. 28% of respondents favor the first option, 26 the second, 24 the third, and 21 did not feel concerned. To test our hypothesis, it is therefore once again in the responses formulated by community of belonging that it is interesting to focus. So Kanak respondents show the only clear trend, with 45% preferring to maintain the current system through some support alternatives such as mixed system or full elections. European respondents are divided, with about a third favoring a mixed system, a third feeling unconcerned and strong oppositions to the current appointment method, which only has 10% support. Polynesian respondents lean toward a mixed system, while a notable portion remains unconcerned and fewer support full elections. Mixed race respondents display not clear reference, as support is almost evenly split among the three options. Finally, Asian and other communities respondents show a gradual shift towards elections, to the largest group reports being unconcerned by the issue. So, as a conclusion, lessons to be drawn. As we explore the various research hypotheses I have outlined throughout this presentation today, through the questions posed to the population on the ground, 1 year on from a major conflict in the archipelago's history that claimed 15 lives, left 100 injured, caused a drastic fall in the country's GDP, and led to thousands of job losses, I hope I have shown you through these slides that although there are still strong trends identified across the communities in the country, which certainly means it remains a divided society, bridges can be built, provided we move beyond the binary question of yes or no and seek to identify reasonable areas of compromise where everyone is prepared to take a step towards the other in order to find solutions that are acceptable by themselves, by the others, and for their country. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Anthony. That political science perspective was fantastic. Yeah, great research. Our final speaker on this panel is Mana Rahimana Tevehitua. And he'll be speaking at the title, French Polynesia, a lever of France's Indo-Pacific. So we're looping back to Denise's beginning. Thank you.
Yorana everyone, Talofa, bonjour, bonjour. I'm happy to be here, and thank you for attending to this session in large numbers. My topic is on French Polynesia's international external affairs. So since the surge of decolonisation forces across the region and within the French territories in the 70s, the legitimacy of France as a resident power, 17 kilometers away from its mainland, has been a subject of debate. The French state has therefore had to justify its continued presence. This is demonstrated by the quality of its relationship with French overseas territories, thanks to the transfer of powers and financial support. It has also contributed to regional priorities in terms of human and environmental security, participating into France activations against natural disasters and quad patrolling against illegal fishing. With the Indo-Pacific strategy launched in May 2018, which focuses on 4 priorities: security, economy, environment, and multilateralism, France intends to assert its presence by addressing issues with its territories and increasing aid in the region. For example, giving 40 million for the Kiwa initiative against climate change, around 200 million for AFD, Agence Française de Développement, and roughly 1.7 billion every year for the Pacific Fund. However, France's sovereignty remains partly contested in French Pacific territories. Its Indo-Pacific positioning as a third way against new imperialisms is challenged by the decline of its own strategic autonomy and the concentration of its financial resources in the region on its dependencies. In this context, this presentation will examine the role assigned by the French state to French Polynesia, as well as French Polynesia's or Mā'ohi Nui for some people, own agenda. After New Caledonia, French Polynesia is the most autonomous French territory. My country's main comparative advantage in the world lies in its in the possession of a vast and protected exclusive economic zone, the value of which should increase alongside migration of tuna towards Eastern Pacific, as well as if deep sea mining were proven viable elsewhere. This raises the question, is French Polynesia a lever of France's Indo-Pacific strategy? To answer this, we will first consider France's ability to impose its preferences over French Polynesia, then their concerted rapprochement with Pacific Island countries, and finally, potential avenues of cooperation with Australia. The French state is keen to curtail two sources of divergences through narrative control. Both relate to France's sovereignty, partnerships with rival countries, and calls for emancipation. The first area of disagreement concerns partnering with an economic powerhouse. Following the 2008 economic crisis, French Polynesia experienced a prolonged economic slowdown for lasting 5 years. At the same time, the Chinese consulate in Tahiti opened in 2007. It facilitated the visit of Chinese investors and engineers in collaboration with a French ship association. There has been great hope for cooperation in the realm of fish farming. The Hoare atoll was earmarked for a major fish farming development with an estimated cost of 250 million at the time. This would have been one of the largest Chinese investments in the region. However, France's geopolitical outlook on the region has changed since Ms. Fisher's book in 2013. Although it was initially open to economic cooperation with China through French Polynesia, the French state has decided to veto the Hoare project despite it falling under the local jurisdiction. This reflects a shift in the West's assessment of China's international behavior, ensuring its power projection within the South China Sea. This has led to the launch of Indo-Pacific strategies designed to obviously counter China's growing influence in this meta-region. The resulting battle for influence has conveniently been wrapped up into an old ideological narrative against authoritarianism in which Western powers would have the upper hand. Unsurprisingly, the second area of tension is decolonisation. The French state has been hoping to close the nuclear legacy with the 2010 Marine Law and subsequent amendments, which were meant to ease access to compensations for victims of nuclear testings. Nevertheless, it does not support studies on transgenerational contamination. Furthermore, the French state is adamant about keeping my country away from a UN self-determination process. Paris expects the situation in the territory to be a domestic affair, and it is unwilling to allow any third party to act against its national integrity. However, the French state has recognized the right to self-determination for New Caledonia, yet denies it to French Polynesia despite it also being on the UN list of non-self-governing territories. French officials explain this differential treatment by reference to different histories, a colonial settlement in New Caledonia, but not in French Polynesia. However, they stopped short of admitting that the colonial injustice in New Caledonia sparked social unrest, ultimately resulting in bloodshed that granted New Caledonia access to the UN self-determination process. No such thing has occurred in French Polynesia in such an obvious way. In any case, the French state is prone to remind local and international audiences of its concessions in terms of budgetary effort and the level of autonomy, which enabled French Polynesia to become a full member of the Pacific Islands Forum. Unlike the previous section, there are also issues where the interests of the French state and French Polynesia overlap. The French state is therefore willing to pool its resources to support the area of convergence, particularly with regard to economic globalization and environmental regulation. The primary domain of of alignment is the economic sphere, in the economic sphere. Since at least the 80s, French Polynesia has been promoting its high-end goods and services, tourism and pearl, abroad with the facilitation of national means. As France's own economic situation has worsened over the past 2 decades, with a debt equivalent to 115% of its GDP, and painful arbitrage to face the military redevelopment under the present geostrategic context, France is more in favor of supporting endogenous economic development through regional integration. Therefore, the French embassy, for example, in Chile, hosted discussions on setting up an undersea cable, the former Humboldt cable project. The French did not oppose the entry of US airlines in Tahitian destination, and it decided to hold an Olympic event in the territory. This was the first time ever in 24. In addition to improving international connectivity and promotion, the local and national governments have agreed since 2018 to support the going out moment of local companies in the Pacific. Consequently, the challenge for Paris, with a checkbook under pressure, is to reduce the financial cost of supporting the overseas territories while maintaining their loyalty to the French Republic. A second point of convergence stems from a shared environmental concern. As a transnational source of socio-economic services, the international environment has been identified by French diplomacy as a key rallying point between France and developing states around the world. At the same time, however, French Polynesia is undergoing negative externalities from foreign activities in the Pacific, such as overfishing and pollution. Both Paris and Papeete have thus cooperated in order to form a coalition with Pacific Island countries. Together, they advocated for the 1.5 degree limit at COP21 and for the ratification of the Treaty on Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction, the BBNJ, at the last Ocean Conference in Nice. Prior to these two significant international events, Papeete contributed to formalizing a Pacific Bloc position through the Tapu-Tapu Aotea and then the Papeete Declarations in 2015 and 2024, respectively. Along these lines, the incumbent authorities in Paris and Papeete both strongly support a moratorium on deep-sea mining. This stance is not without its challenges. It means depriving the territory a potential source of economic independence in relation to the French government. At the end, this diplomatic commitment to environmental protection not only secures France's regional acceptance as a benefactor, but also consolidates its global standing as a norm influencer. Sorry for the... In light of successive international shocks and in underperforming domestic governments, people in French Polynesia, like those in other parts of the Pacific, are preoccupied with deteriorating quality of life. Imported inflation, the proliferation on non-communicable disease, the impact of aging population on pensions, and the persistence of youth unemployment. The current pro-independence government in Papeete aims to develop resilience through food and energy sovereignty, for example, ocean technology for cooling systems and electricity generation, a more sustainable post-COVID tourism, and the digital economy. In order to implement this plan, local communities require capacity building, whereas the university and scientific agencies established in the French Pacific territories are mostly driven by public funding and human resource from mainland France. Based on its marine research cluster, France applied last year to host the UN Ocean Institute in Brest with an operational unit in French Polynesia. Across the world, the United Nations University headquartered in Japan has 12 institutes, but none focused on the ocean. This unit in French Polynesia could facilitate training in ocean governance and social sciences for future Pacific diplomats and legal experts on the BBNJ Treaty. Furthermore, this unit could help to measure useful ocean parameters. For instance, research on deep-sea ecosystems could support possible claims in international arenas with evidence of plume spreading. The need to quantify spillovers was evident during the Montara oil spill, which damaged Indonesian fishing grounds from 2009 and cause costly international litigation. Research will help to standardize an international methodology for quantifying and certifying the amount of carbon dioxide captured and stored by oceanic ecosystems. The newly formed Pacific Interparliamentary Association, PIPA, could adopt a resolution to establish a blue carbon fund financed through climate funds and emissions offsetting by companies such as Qantas or Rio Tinto, which are aiming for carbon neutrality by 2050. Accordingly, Australian universities prospecting for European funds could strengthen research and knowledge synergies with France and French Polynesia. And the Australia-Pacific Islands Business Council could increase investments in such a secure environment. Ultimately, to conclude, French Polynesia aspires to climb the global value chains, transitioning from a rentier model, the Myra model, that depends on a single patron on plundering nature, to an economy based on knowledge and innovation. In this quest for a post-extractivist development model, Pacific Islanders could eventually demonstrate that it is durably feasible to strike a balance between economic growth and ecological conservation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mana. Your focus on convergence and Anthony's on grey zones makes me think that there is perhaps a generational shift going on, and especially when you compare it to the politics that's happening in Tahiti at the moment with the divide between some of the younger politicians and the Anthony Juros and etc. and Oscar Te Maru. I will not abuse my privileges as the chair. I will let the audience ask a question or two or three or four if we have time of our panelists. So panelists, do you mind changing the seats if that's possible?
So I believe a bit of this context was talked about during the presentations, and thank you everyone for those really insightful presentations. My name's Liam and I'm a student here at ANU. My question is sort of how, in particular to New Caledonia, but also French Polynesia, how is the independence movement sort of overall shaped by climate change? Is French climate action sort of lending itself to an argument perhaps against independence? And so like it's a moratorium on deep sea mining from the French government. Does that sort of lend itself credibility for climate action? But also, is it sort of negated? I think in New Caledonia, there's a lot of abandoned mines that are unrehabilitated. And also, is there a sort of a fear that if New Caledonia does achieve independence, that there won't be as much sort of climate finance and resilience projects in the region?
Maybe we'll have a second question and then we can answer.
Thank you. I had a question for Anthony or Jimmy. One of the achievements of the Namira Accord was what you described as the rebalancing between the three provinces, economic, social investment in the north and the Loyalty Islands and so on. And one of the criticisms of Bougival has been that there's a refocusing of powers on the provinces rather than the central government, and particularly the southern province. And the loyalists have said, well, more people are moving to the south, so we need more money, to pay for services, etc., etc. But I mean, Paul Neotin, the president of the Northern Province, said that, the hyper-provincialisation was the foundations for partitions of the country. So I wonder if you could comment about this as an element, beyond the sovereignty question, the question about the balance between the provinces and how much that's complicating discussions at the moment about whether more political power, more fiscal power, more tax power should go to the southern province.
Thank you. So there was a question about mining and then next question. Denise and Mana, did you want to start on that first question?
Sorry, I didn't get it quite right on the mining question, but definitely it is now transferred competence to the provincial governments. So whatever decision is made on mining, it the decision lies with the provincial government. So if tomorrow the country becomes sovereign and fully independent, then that should definitely revert back to the country or the government as a government here. But for now, mining powers lies within the provincial governments. I'll follow on for next question on hyper-provincialization. With regards to the new Bougival agreement, yes, there's been a lot of critics that each province might be able to set its own taxes and fiscal powers. However, from what I understand, I'm not in the heart of negotiations, but what I understand is that that will need to go through the local parliament, the Congress, to approve if one province is able to impose taxes at its own within its own territory. So that's also subject to approval by the local parliament.
I'm not sure I understood the first question. Maybe you were asking if the environmental commitment was used as, or how does it articulate with the independence movement? For some, I believe for some people, this could be seen as a convenient rationale to bar the road to access independence. Usually, the exploitation of natural resources is seen as the traditional pathway to achieve it. That said, some people are of the view that we should aim for some more qualitative economic growth based on something that is more innovation-driven and less extractive, less destructive for the environment. But some others would believe that this is a rich thing, that only in the development process, larger countries started with, of course, very detrimental practices to the environment, until they manage at some point to shift toward other sources of growth. But new candidates for independence are being said that you can't start from the same baseline. You'd have to make the leap to aim for something more more desirable, more acceptable with the current notions of responsible and sustainable economic development. So yeah, these are the thoughts that I would have to share. I'm not sure if you are satisfied.
Yannick, thank you for your question. I can add a few words, but I think you asked the question and you have a bit an idea of the framing of the answers. The Matignon agreement was effectively a rebalancing agreement, and we talk about power sharing. So in the Inclusive Peace Project, when we analyze the power sharing, there is two levels of power sharing. Okay, there is the power sharing between France and New Caledonia, what France sovereignty accepts to share with New Caledonia, but it still remains from the French sovereignty, and the internal repartition of power inside, which is the internal power sharing. And the commentators of the Matignon Agreement talk about an internal federalism, which was satisfying for most of the partners, and that's the reason why they signed the agreement in 1988. Because it was giving the opportunity of Kanak people to prove for 10 years that they would be able, in the capacity to rule a province and then to go into independence. So they were supposed to vote for the referendum in 1998 for the independence, which has been postponed, and they signed a new agreement in 1998. And then they talk about decolonization. I was recently watching some discussions they had talking about the Matignon signature, and Paul Nyautin reminded that they didn't manage to have the decolonization word in the Matignon agreement, right? It came up after 1998. So I think during the whole period of the agreements, the local actors, political actors, were satisfied with this rebalancing, with the fact that having this province for the south, like led by, of course, by non-independence representatives, and giving the opportunity of the north and the islands to which are independence, pro-independence parties. So it was the possibility for them to develop the mining industry, the tourism, or other stuff that they tried to do during this last decades. But I think the current debate around the provinces for the Bougival agreement is the new repartition of seats at the Congress. And I think that's where we have the biggest debate, and why so many commentators put the warning, because of the fact that we were going back into the power sharing agreement, which was signed in 1998, because there is a risk that the non-independence representatives will have the biggest majority, and then we come back, we turn the page of the constitutionalism frame for the Nouméa Accord, and moving slowly to a majoritarian system where a majority can impose to the minority its politics, and which show that in New Caledonia leads to what it led in the last years. That's all I can answer to you, Nick.
And thank you to all the panelists. My name is Anna Naupa. I guess my question is taking us to the regional engagement with the French Pacific islands and countries. And I note that we're still waiting to see the public report from the Troika Plus mission to Kanaky-New Caledonia. So I wonder what level of support is actually there from the Pacific. I think, Denise, you mentioned the Pacific is watching. Perhaps it was watching, but how much is it watching at the moment when this report is still yet to come out? Which leads me to a question for you all to choose to answer as you like. Noting that French Polynesia and New Caledonia are members of the Pacific Islands Forum now, and were therefore part of the Boy Declaration on Regional Security, which is very explicit in that it has a commitment to recognising the human security and protection of rights of Pacific people. And so how does that principle that's under the Pacific Islands Forum, of which your countries are members, how does that principle translate for still colonised territories and the work that the region needs to be doing to support the human rights of the people of your countries? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Barbara Age. I'm a student at the Department of Pacific Affairs. Thanks so much for those really excellent presentations and the updates that you've provided. I just have two questions. One is about the presentation on the customary Senate. I'm sorry if I missed any part of the presentation that talked about the current composition and as to why your reasons for the research to include more members to the Senate. Second question is on the pro-independent political parties. What's the level of solidarity amongst all the parties in terms of the self-determination issue compared to, maybe 2011, 2012 when MSG conducted ministerial missions? I recall at that time, not everyone was on the same page. So I'd be interested to know what the situation is now. Thank you.
Right, I would about to first answer to Anna's questions regarding the regional aspect of it. Yes, as you know, New Caledonia and French Polynesia became full members of the Pacific Island Forum in 2016. And since then, they've been committing to every work within the Pacific Island Forum, and I've been able to sign up to some of the declarations within the forum, knowing that external relations is a shared competency between France and New Caledonia. So when it comes to issues of security, for instance, we have to consult with Paris or through the High Commission in Nouméa to discuss our positions on issues of regional security. But with regards to the Boe Declaration, it is clear that in terms of human security or environment security, it is New Caledonia's competency to being able to put forward its position on those issues when it comes to defense and other sovereign issues in terms of security. And then that is left to France to put forward. But that doesn't mean that France can voice its position within the Pacific Island Forum. We make sure that as a full member of the forum, it is New Caledonia's position that is put forward at the forum to align with the regional position on those issues. So we know that France has been trying to come through to Pacific territories to influence the Pacific agenda, and that's why I said in my presentation that this issue of self-determination in New Caledonia as well as French Polynesia is not an internal issue to France and its territories. It is definitely a regional issue. And I'd like to pick up again on Her Excellency's great opening speech in this morning when she said that self-determination is not only about political independence, it is about a country's capacity to self-determine or to determine its own future. And that also applies to us as a region. So when I say that the issue of New Caledonia's political independence is not an internal issue to France and New Caledonia, it is also an issue to the region in terms of political stability, in terms of regional security. So all members of, whether the Pacific Island Forum or Malaysian Spearhead Group or all other regional organizations need to look into the issue of New Caledonia as a regional issue and not as an internal issue. Australia may step back and watch and say it's an internal matter to New Caledonia and France. It is not. It is definitely a regional issue. And what happened last year in New Caledonia impacted the whole region. Some member countries of the forum had to evacuate their nationals from New Caledonia because that impacted also the region. So definitely it is an issue of regional importance. So we are coming back to the Boe Declaration, and not only the Boe Declaration, but to some other commitments that New Caledonia makes through the Pacific Island Forum. We make sure that whatever position is put forward at regional level is definitely a position of New Caledonia as a full member of the forum, and not a position that we are being imposed or asked to take forward for France as the administrative power.
I would just note that as an outsider reading the text of the Bougival Accord and the complementary Élysée-Oudinot Accords, there seems to be a walking back by France of the derogation of powers already given under Foreign Affairs, which to New Caledonia, and I believe even to French Polynesia under the 2004 Pact, there are full powers of external relations within the region for regional affairs. But the Bougival Accord and its complementary protocol say that quite explicitly that foreign affairs will be subject to French strategic interests and French perspectives. So I agree, I can see, as what Jimmy said, that it's untested and that clearly there would be a consultative process, and that I doubt that New Caledonia would allow itself to bow to at every turn within the Pacific Island Forum to France. I just note that in this very uncertain environment, the Bougival Accord actually rolls back what has already been given to New Caledonia and to French Polynesia, in fact.
Thank you so much for the question. I try to give you a bit of elements to maybe clarify the research. So first of all is research, right? It's not a project to reframe the customary Senate, it just transposes into hypothesis. So when you look at the pillars of the constitutionalism, power sharing, they talk about 4 pillars. The first one is a coalition government. The second one is the proportional representation. The other one is the veto given to communities of belonging, to ethnies. And the last one is the segmental autonomy, which is the representation of the identities in a separate way of the political sphere. Okay, so that's the answer I gave to Nick for the power sharing. You can see a kind of veto given to the communities in New Caledonia by the repartition in provinces, right? This is the political veto, okay? But there is another one, is the representation of the Kanak identity on the customary Senate. And something to give a precision to make is the customary Senate doesn't have, it has a consultative advice role. Okay, so the Congress has to consult the customary Senate for each questions regarding Kanak identity. And in the history of the Nouméa Agreement, the Congress followed the advice of the customary Senate. The hypothesis we had is, would the other communities of belonging will be inclined to integrate the customary Senate. So the first option we had in mind was the Wallisian and Futunian. Why? Because they have a customary representation in New Caledonia. Okay, and the other aspect, the last hypothesis, was a representation for all of the communities of belongings. So what we found surprising is that everybody rejects only the integration of Wallisian and Futunian, but there is a really thin majority of people who wants everyone to integrate. But as you see on the screen, there's a lot of people also who declare themselves as not concerned, like they don't feel confident to position it themselves because they would say like customary, how do you say, affairs concerns people who are from the customary, status, right? So that's the reason why I think we found also that, for example, there's a lot of people who wants the status quo on the customary Senate. For the second question you ask about the political party, it's true that if you look at things from an external point of view at the moment, the independence movement looks like really segmented. Okay, since in fact the origin of that is the Bougival Agreement, and as the document Denise showed just before, the 12th of July 2025, you can see the different signatories. Everybody signed the documents. The FLNKS, the representative of the National Union for Independence, the Loyalist parties, Calédonie Ensemble, Éveil Océanien, all the parties. And really, quickly the FLNKS get out of the Bougival agreement, and UNI stayed in the process of convincing people in New Caledonia to adhere to the Bougival agreement and to go for and to vote in favor of the agreement if a referendum was given in New Caledonia to ask to the Caledonian people the question. But it's, again, when I made my Viva, PhD Viva 2 years ago, just before the May 2024, I had the same question. And when you look at the history of the independence movement, you never see any period where all the organization, all the political parties comes together, like unity is a myth, okay? You never see in the history, even in 2018, when you thought that for the first referendum on self-determination, postponed from 88 to 1998, and then to 2018, you will expect that everybody will go to the referendum. Like, we have been waiting for that time for decades. And in 2018, like 2 organizations of the independence movement didn't participate. So I think it's, when you ask this question to Jean-Marie Tjibaou in 1988 about unity, he will say like, it's, how do you say? It's also a sign of democracy inside the independence movement to have the contradictions inside. So it's a good sign because it means that we are organizations who are debating and we are not following the same line altogether. So that's a way of seeing the problem at the moment. We'll see how the configuration will go for the next steps, because now it looks like, yeah, Bougival agreement is more behind us. So we will see how the things will go for the next steps.
Really good. I think that's a really fitting place to end. Quite fortuitously, I think George, our conference organizer, might have the microphone in his hand. George, do you want to say any words to wrap up the day?
Thank you very much for the spot. Thank you very much for today. Starting from this morning, we had a powerful session and message, not only from our Ngunnawal Paul House, but also from Her Excellency Fionga Fiame, Naomi, in terms of our conference, and has led to what has been a fruitful long day and rich discussions throughout. On behalf of the organizing committee, thank you each and every one of you for making out to this part of the program. I know it's a very long day, but I think the panel from a deep dive into not only New Caledonia but French Polynesia is essential as the theme on self-determination and the journey of decolonisation continues. I just wanted to remind everyone about tomorrow's program. We do have another great day too. We have sessions from corruption, money and crime, to sessions on big data, to beyond extraction, indigenous and relational approaches to Melanesia research, to a fantastic panel from Tupou Tertiary Institute in the afternoon. We hope that you're able to join us again tomorrow for another rich day, and we also hope that you have a good rest, especially for those who traveled quite far to be here. I know you may still be a bit jet lagged with the time zones. We move back, but we hope that you have a pleasant evening. We're very sorry we do not have the tradition of conference dinners and conference drinks, but we do have kava, and very soon there will be an announcement, not today, but tomorrow, from the kava committee on where that will be. But we've decided that tonight we take some rest, and then tomorrow that kava session will come to life and be informed. Have a good rest, and we look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow. Thank you.